Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and we are back at it with spoiler season for Magic the Gathering's Lorwyn Eclipsed expansion. We already did our first video covering every single card that was spoiled in the debut, so if you haven't seen that already, that is the top video right now in the spoiler playlist for Lorwyn Eclipsed. We put all the spoilers in there. I even do some spoiler shorts covering single cards as they pop up that sometimes get in there before I have a chance to sit down and record a full length like this. So if you want to stay completely up to date with all of my spoilers, definitely check out that playlist and check out the debut video if you haven't seen that already. It's at the top of that playlist. This video is covering every single other card that was spoiled on day one of spoiler season that wasn't in the debut video that Wizards of the Coast posted. So all of the other day one spoilers, we're gonna dive right in. We have a ton of stuff to get through. So before we do, please like the video. It helps me so much. It helps get the video out to more people, which helps the channel grow. I appreciate it more than I can express with words. I honestly mean that. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an upload. We get tons of spoiler content on the way. I've got some deck techs on the way, and we do community night every Monday if you want to play games against me. So look forward to that. But with all of that out of the way, let's dive right in. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of all of these spoilers, I just briefly wanted to show off the art for the full art basic lands coming in this set, because they're doing something really interesting with them. This is the plains here, and this is depicting Lorwyn, and what they're doing is they're giving every single basic a second full art land to depict Shadowmoor, the other side of the coin, the other dimension, if you will, the other aspect to Lorwyn as a plane. So every single one of these lands has both a Lorwyn and then a Shadowmoor version. Here we have the Island Lorwyn version, and then Island Shadowmoor, and then we have Swamp Lorwyn, Swamp Shadowmoor. They look amazing. We have Mountain Lorwyn, Mountain Shadowmoor, and then finally Forest Lorwyn and Forest Shadowmoor. But let's dive into the juicy stuff. We're going to start with the commons. We've got Moonglove Extractor, a 2/1 elf warlock for 1 black and 2, and when this creature attacks, you draw a card and lose a life. Actually seems really good for limited. Even if you only swing with it once and they eat your guy, you still get to draw a card to replace it. Sure, you lose a life, but in the grand scheme of things, digging one card deeper into your 40 card limited deck is going to be good. If you get to swing with it multiple times, if it can even survive just one attack, it gets really, really good. So I actually think for a common at least, this card's going to be really, really good in limited. But next up, we've got Elder Auntie, a 2/2 Goblin Warlock for 1 red and 2. When this creature enters, you create a 1/1 black and red Goblin creature token. That's already kind of good. I love how all of the commons that they're putting out these days, they just seem to have just immediate value. None of them are unusable in limited, which is nice. Getting a 2/2 body and a 1/1 body for 1 card, even though the 3 mana is a lot, it's not necessarily the most efficient card in the world. Again, it's a common. It's a really good filler spot for your 3-drop slot in your limited deck, and it's going to give you a little bit of 2-for-1 value there. Plus, if there are Goblin tribal payoffs and synergies, this gets even better because it gives you 2 bodies that will both pick up those buffs. I don't know for sure. We haven't seen a lot of the cards yet from this set, so I don't know for sure if those sorts of tribal benefits are coming for goblins. But if they do, this card gets even better. Next up, we have Tend the Sprigs. This is a sorcery for 1 green and 2. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. And if you control 7 or more lands, or tree folk, which is interesting, create a 3/4 green tree folk creature token with reach. I actually think this card is really good for a common. For limited, I don't necessarily think it's going to see any standard play, especially with power creep these days. Power creep's a hell of a drug, but being able to mana fix in limited, find the color that you're missing, is good, and it puts it straight onto the battlefield, so it also ramps you, which is nice. And then you can get a 3/4 for free if you get this later in the game. So if you've got 2 of these in your deck, maybe the first one just ramps you, but because you got ramped, that second one's going to be able to hit that 7 land mark that much sooner. So when you do draw into it, you jam it. Not only do you ramp again, color fix again, but you get a 3/4 with reach. I think that's really, really cool. Even just grabbing this later in the game, having this be a top deck later in the game that grabs you a land and gives you a 3/4 with reach for 3 mana is incredibly efficient. And in the early game, even though it's not as efficient, it's fixing your colors, which is also really important. I have a feeling this card's going to be very, very important in Limited, and I can't wait to see if I'm actually right about that. But next up, we've got Sun-Dappled Celebrant. This is a 5/6 Treefolk Cleric for 2 white and 4 with both Convoke and Vigilance. So it's a 5/6 Vigilance for 6, which isn't that bad to start, at least for a common. If you don't have much of a top end, you can run this as your top end, except it's way better because it doesn't have to be your top end. You could tap up to 6 creatures, assuming you have at least 2 white creatures, and play this for free, which just seems insane. This, to me, is confirmation that Convoke's coming back in a very, very big way. We already knew Convoke was in this set, but until seeing it on a common like this, I wasn't entirely sure how deep they were going to go. Convoke's going to be huge, and it's going to be huge in Standard as well. I don't necessarily think this card will see play in Standard, but this card makes me feel like Convoke's going to be big, and therefore there will be plenty of crazy good Convoke cards for a probably tier 1, tier 1.5 Convoke deck in Standard, which is exciting. But either way, even if you're not playing this for free, if you're just tapping 1 or 2 creatures and getting a 5/6 Vigilance for like 4 mana, that can be absolutely nuts. I think this card's going to be way better than it looks, at least for Limited. Next up, we've got 𝐿𝑒𝑠 Informant. I think it's pronounced 𝐿ESE Informant. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. A 3/1 Elf Scout for 1 green and 1. When this creature enters or dies, you surveil 1. Nothing super crazy, but the one thing I do want to point out about this card is that Elf Tribal is going to be really, really good in this set. Elf Tribal's coming back in a big way. We've already seen a number of cards that care about elves as a tribe, and we still have so much of the set, most of the set, that's been unspoiled so far. So this card is way better than it looks on the surface because inevitably it's going to pick up all of those tribal synergies for elves. And then, you know, it enters or dies, you surveil 1. So no matter what, you get to dig for something you need. You get to maybe put something in your graveyard. You get to do it again when this inevitably trades. And because of the 3 power, it can maybe trade up. So when you add up all of the negligible little bits of silver lining value, I actually think this is a pretty good 2-drop for commons. And honestly, I'm saying that about pretty much every card, which is kind of crazy. But let's move on. Next up, we've got Appeal to Erudue. Appeal to Erudue. Sorry, I need more coffee. 1 white and 3 for an instant with Convoke. 1 or 2 target creatures each get +2/+1 until end of turn. Very interesting. This card is way better on defense because you can block with all your guys and then still tap them down to play this for free and buff up 2 of your guys that were blocking and maybe blow out your opponent, kill a bunch of their stuff. But it's also cool that it can be used in sort of an aggressive way to just get in there for your last 2 to 4 damage by buffing up the right creatures that went unblocked, and that alone can be pretty powerful. Next up, we've got Crossroads Watcher. This is a 3/3 Kithkin Ranger with Trample for 1 green and 2, and whenever another creature you control enters, this creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Nothing super crazy, but 3/3 Trample for 3 is pretty on rate, and the fact that you get this buff, and it's not just once per turn. So anytime a creature enters, if you get like 4 or 5 token creatures to enter the battlefield all at once, this thing becomes like a 7 or 8/3 with Trample, and it only ever costs you 3 mana. So I actually think this is one of the better commons we've seen so far, and all of them have been kind of okay at the very least, but this one I feel like is going to see a lot of play. It just seems really efficient at 3. A 3-drop like this coming down on turn 3 or maybe even turn 2 if there's some kind of ramp involved on turn 1 could be pretty nuts. I don't think it's quite there for constructed, but it's kind of close. I think this is going to be really nuts and Limited. But next up, we've got Iron Shield Elf. This is a 3/1 elf warrior for 1 black and 1, and you can discard a card. This creature gains indestructible until end of turn, and you have to tap it. We've seen cards like this in the past, but usually in white. Being able to do this in black is actually kind of scary. Sometimes you can discard things that you want to be in your graveyard while also getting the indestructible. Sometimes you don't even necessarily care that you're discarding a card because they block with something you get to kill, so it's almost like whatever you discard turns into creature removal. Sometimes it could just be an extra land that's stuck in your hand that you don't really need. So there's a lot of value here. A 3/1 that can just become indestructible on a whim is really, really good, even if you don't use the ability. Having that threat of activation that your opponent has to constantly play around means you're going to have the upper hand at all times, even if you never actually activate the ability. The fact that it has 2 relevant creature types, with one of them being elf, which is really, really relevant in this set, just makes it that much better. Really, really good card. But next up, we've got Goat Nap, a sorcery for 1 red and 2, gain control of target creature until end of turn. So this is this set's Threaten effect. Untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn. If that creature is a goat, it also gets +3/+0 until end of turn. What a weird card. How many goats are we actually getting in this set? Probably not a lot. What you really need to realize about this card is that it cares about changelings. It cares about shapeshifters with the changeling ability that have all creature types. If you manage to take any creature from your opponent that has all creature types, it's going to count as a goat. It's going to get buffed. So this is a really good like anti-changeling card, even though it doesn't necessarily shout that from the rooftops when you first see it. But that's primarily, I think, what this is going to be used for. And even just as a normal threaten effect, it's pretty on rate. But the fact that against changelings you can get that huge buff is pretty impressive. Next up, we've got Flock Imposter, a 2/2 shapeshifter with changeling, speak of the devil, for 1 white and 2. It also has flash and flying, and when this creature enters, you return up to 1 other target creature you control to its owner's hand. Everything about this card is awesome. It's sort of like a less efficient, more expensive version of Nurturing Pixie. You can't pick up any permanent. You can only pick up a creature that you control. But still, it sort of has that same vibe. You can do a lot of the same things where you can re-trigger enters the battlefield abilities on whatever you recast, stuff like that. But most importantly, because it has flash, you can also do it in response to a removal spell. So if your opponent tries to kill your thing, in response, you play this, pick up your thing, save it, get to replay it later, maybe re-trigger and enters the battlefield ability. There's a lot of potential card advantage and just value kind of naturally, organically built into this card, which is cool. And then on top of it, it's a 2/2 flyer for 3, and it's a changeling, so it's going to pick up every single tribal buff in the entire set in limited. I actually kind of think this card is good enough for standard, to be completely honest. I love changeling. I love making standard decks that go really, really deep on 2 tribes instead of 1, and then use a bunch of changelings to cross over and pick up all of those synergies. And I've got a really, really interesting idea for a deck that I cannot wait to put together as soon as this set comes out. Now that I know that changeling is going to be a big part of the set, I'm not going to give it away just yet, but there's going to be something really, really cool coming, and I'm excited about it. I'm excited about this card. But next up, we've got Sizzling Changeling, even more changelings, a 3/2 shapeshifter with changeling for 1 red and 2. And when this creature dies, you exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. Everything about this is good. It's going to pick up all of your tribal buffs. Like I said, it's got 3 power for the 3 mana, so it can trade pretty efficiently. And when it does trade, you get to play a card for free. It's kind of like card draw, as long as you're careful to make sure that you're only trading in a situation where you're going to be able to use that card. And since you get to use it until the end of your next turn, you're always going to have the option of untapping and have all of your mana available to you in order to play that card. When you put all of this together, both the changeling and the card advantage, and the fact that it's not necessarily below rate, 3 power for 3 mana seems kind of fine in conjunction with the rest of the card. I actually think this is good. I feel like a broken record because I feel like I'm saying that about every card, but that's just how I'm feeling right now. Next up, we've got Chomping Changeling. So many Changelings. A 1/2 Shapeshifter with Changeling for 1 green and 2. I wonder if it's a cycle. This is the third Changeling we've seen in a row. 3 different colors that all cost 3 mana. So I'm starting to feel like maybe this is a cycle of 3 mana Changelings. And when this creature enters, you destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. This card's awesome. Sure, the stats aren't super good, but getting to 2 for 1 when you play it, destroy an artifact or enchantment while also picking up all tribal benefits for all tribes because of the Changeling status, seems kind of awesome to me. I'm excited to brew around it. But next up, we've got Seer. This is a pretty interesting removal spell. An instant for 1 red and 1, and it deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker. So the downside is it can't hit your opponent's head, which it would probably be too powerful if it could. But the fact that it's instant speed, and it's 4 damage for 2 mana, not 3 damage, and if you need to, you can hit a planeswalker, is pretty relevant. In Limited, it won't be as relevant. That being said, there are 2 planeswalkers in this set, not 1. This is the first set where we're finally going back to 2 planeswalkers per set, which I'm really excited about, and that does make something like Seer a little bit better. I have a feeling this is going to be premium removal in Standard moving forward, just because of how versatile it is and the fact that it has that instant speed. But next up, we've got Blossoming Defense. This is 1 green mana for an instant. Target creature you control gets +2/+2 and hexproof until end of turn. We usually get a card like this in every set, but the fact that this is almost a giant growth and a hexproof protection spell in the same card for still only 1 mana does make it a little bit better than what I expected us to get for a 1 mana protection spell. It doesn't necessarily grant indestructible or anything like that. It might not always save the creature in combat if you don't give enough of a buff, if the +2/+2 isn't enough to save it from the combat damage, but it's still super good. Almost a giant growth and hexproof for 1 mana is pretty wild. But next up, we've got Personify. This is 1 white and 1 for an instant. Exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Create a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. So a 2 mana instant speed flicker spell for creatures that also gives you a 1/1 Changeling? Yes, please. This might be my favorite card spoiled so far. This is awesome. Changelings are going to be awesome. That deck that I was talking about earlier is going to be awesome. Getting to flicker and also make a Changeling for 2 mana at instant speed. Like, is it just me or does that seem like insane value? I guess it's because I know how crazy Changelings can go with the ways that I'm thinking about building it, and I also am really excited about building a Flicker or Blink deck. In fact, that might be the next deck tech I make, even before Lorwyn comes out. Sometime later this week, I might make that, because I've been dying to make a Flicker Blink deck with all of the new juicy tools available to us in the last few sets. I really think it's going to be pretty nuts. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Personify, one of the best Flicker spells I've seen in a while, getting free board presence out of it that picks up every single tribal buff. Can't wait to play it. But next up, we've got Virulent Emissary, a 1/1 elf assassin with Death Touch for 1 green mana. Already nuts. It's already nuts. A 1/1 Death Touch for 1 that counts as an elf and picks up all of the elf tribal abilities is just crazy. The fact that it's an assassin is exciting to me because I messed around with brewing assassin decks a few sets ago and it was like almost there. The assassin deck is like almost real, but it's just lacking 1-drops is mainly what it's lacking. This being a 1-drop assassin, we might finally be there, guys. We might be able to do that deck, but it's also got another line of text. Whenever another creature you control enters, you gain a life. So not only is it a 1/1 death-touching elf assassin for 1 mana, but it's also infinite life triggers. Well, not infinite life triggers, but a life trigger every single creature that enters, which is the perfect sort of a 1-drop for any kind of life gain deck. We're going to build this into life gain as well. I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say this card's going to be really important in Standard moving forward. I have a feeling life gain decks are going to love this, elf decks are going to love this, and I'm really looking forward to messing around with assassins again. This card is awesome. But next up, we've got Wanderwine Farewell, a kindred sorcery merfolk for 2 blue and 5. It has Convoke, so you can reduce the cost of it for each creature you tap, potentially even play it for free, and you return 1 or 2 target non-land permanents to their owner's hand. Then if you control a Merfolk, you create a 1/1 white and blue Merfolk creature token for each permanent returned to its owner's hand this way. So what's interesting is you have to already control a Merfolk in order to get more Merfolk. You can't just play this and get the creatures, right? So it needs to be in a Merfolk deck for sure. It being a kindred sorcery, Merfolk means it potentially could pick up some tribal benefits as well. Although it's hard to say what sort of tribal benefits might apply to something like this. Maybe there are cards in this set that are like Merfolk cost 1 less to play, stuff like that. This could pick up the tribal benefit of that. Really, really interesting. The fact that it can return 2 non-land permanents, it kind of reminds me a little bit of This Town Ain't Big Enough. Maybe a bit of a fixed This Town Ain't Big Enough. The Convoke does mean that you could play it for super cheap or free, similar to This Town Ain't Big Enough. And you can get to bounce 2 things, whether it's your own stuff for like a Nurturing Pixie deck, or your opponent's stuff to just put them behind on tempo. Getting a couple of 1/1s out of it could just be extra gravy, but in the right deck, if you're running Merfolk, it could also be very, very relevant. Next up, we have Vinebred Brawler, a 4/2 elf berserker for 1 green and 2. This creature must be blocked if able, and whenever this creature attacks, another target elf you control gets +2/+1 until end of turn. So this is one of those elvish tribal payoffs we've been talking about, and in the right limited deck, I think this is actually really, really good. You can make sure one of your other creatures gets through, or multiple of your other creatures get through because they have to block this. Maybe they can't block the thing that they want to, but more importantly, one of your other elves gets a lot bigger, and even if they do block it, maybe trades up with a better creature, which can be really powerful. Again, elf tribal is going to be nuts. Tribal decks in general are going to be really good in this set, and I think you're going to see this guy pop up a lot in limited. But next up, we've got Spell Snare, a returning favorite, and I actually think this card is going to change the face of Standard. An instant for 1 blue mana, counter target spell with mana value 2. What's so powerful about Spell Snare is it doesn't care if it's a creature or a non-creature. It counters anything with mana value 2. You do have to be careful with how you play it because it can't counter something with mana value 2 or less. It has to counter specifically something with mana value 2. That being said, this kind of evens up the odds when your opponent's on the play. They get to sort of get ahead and play their 2-drop when you only have 1 mana available, but by spell snaring it, you spend your 1 mana to make their 2 mana play do nothing, and you sort of even the field as far as tempo is concerned. So I really like Spell Snare. I think it's going to be a huge contender in Standard. I think you're going to see it everywhere, and I'm actually really happy to see this one come back. But next up, we've got Boggart Mischief, a kindred enchantment goblin for 1 black and 2, and when this enchantment enters, you may blight 1, which means you have to choose one of your own creatures to put a -1/-1 counter on. If you do, you create 2 1/1 black and red goblin creature tokens, and whenever a goblin creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So you could sort of use this as a way to like self-sacrifice one of your 1/1s to trigger this and drain a life from them, maybe trigger some other death triggers as well, get some value off your thing dying, and get 2 more 1/1s that you can then sacrifice later on to get even more value in the same way. I really, really like this card a lot. Granted, you do have to be set up for it so that you can blight 1 and make sure that that matters, and that you're able to do that in a situation where it's going to benefit you. Keep in mind, if you just choose to blight 1 of your big guys, he'll just get a little bit smaller and he'll still stay on the battlefield. So having the ability to choose what creature you put your own -1/-1 counter on is a really powerful part of this new blight ability, and I'm excited to see how deep it goes. I actually really, really like this card. I can't wait to build a Standard deck around it. I think Sacrifice is already pretty significant, has a whole bunch of tools available to it in Standard, and I think a card like this can really be built around. It reminds me of Monument to... was it Monument to Endurance? One of the monuments. Black 3-drop enchantment that would give you a dude and give you a drain when things die. it's very, very similar, except if you jump through the hoops of Bogart Mischief, you actually get way more value out of this. It gives you a way to sacrifice something right away and gives you 2/1/1s instead of 1/1/1. So much value packed into this card, and I can't wait to brew. But next up, we've got Shine Striker. This is a 3/3 flying elemental for 2 blue and 4, and it has the Vivid ability. When this creature enters, draw cards equal to the number of colors among permanents you control. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is going to be a really important card in Limited. I think certain decks are going to be built around this Vivid ability, and having a Shine Striker as your top end to not only just refill your hand, but also be a 3/3 flying threat is pretty good. That being said, it is a whopping 6 mana. Finding ways to get this into play for cheaper is going to make it be way, way better if those sorts of things exist within this set. But also, it's an elemental, so it can pick up some elemental tribal benefits, and we've already seen a couple of those. We already know that Evoke's coming back. I think elementals are getting a big push with this set, and I'm excited to see if this maybe even ends up being playable in Standard. The 6 mana makes me think not, but there is an outside chance that with the right support and the right synergies, this card could actually see play. Next up, we've got Dawn Blessed Pennant, an artifact for just 1 colorless mana. As it enters, you choose Elemental, Elf, Fairy, Giant, Goblin, Kithkin, Merfolk, or Treefolk. So now we know for sure those are the 8 big tribes that are getting a huge focus in this set. Whenever a permanent you control of the chosen type enters, you gain a life. So it's a 1 mana turn 1 play that's going to gain you a life in a tribal deck every time you play a creature, as long as it's built into the right tribal deck. You can also pay 2 mana, tap and sack the artifact, return a card of the chosen type from your graveyard to your hand, which is also really powerful. This card's going to be pretty decent in Limited if you're building into any of these tribes. I think it's actually a pretty good pick. You might want to grab it high, but where it really gets crazy, I think, is going to be in Standard. I actually think there will be a Standard deck that wants to use this. I think life gain built around a specific tribe where you can get a bunch of triggers whenever you do gain that life, and then being able to get extra value out of it later by bringing something back, I think that's all really, really good for a 1-drop. So I'm hoping that there's a deck that can exist that is deep enough into life gain synergies and a certain tribe at the same time where this ends up being Standard playable. That's what I'm hoping for, but at the very least in Limited, if you're in the right tribe, this is just going to be value. But next up, we've got Thought Weft Lieutenant, a 2/2 Kithkin soldier for 2 mana in the colors of Selesnya, and whenever this creature or another Kithkin you control enters, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn, which honestly pretty good for an uncommon. 2 mana 2/2 with a buff like that. It's going to buff something up and give it trample the turn you play it. So even if you never get another trigger off of it, it's a 2/2 for 2 that turns something else into a +1/+1 trampler, which is honestly really good in and of itself. You get some beef on your attack that turn, you get a 2/2 for your 2 mana. But then if you can go on to trigger this with more Kithkin in subsequent turns, you're going to get even more crazy value out of this, and it's not limited to once a turn. So if you're super deep into the Kithkin deck, this is going to be a really important piece. In fact, I would go as far as to say this is probably the signpost multicolor uncommon for the Kithkin tribal archetype within this set, and if you're going that direction, you're going to want to grab as many of these as you can. Next up, we've got our first rare today. This is Mornsong Aria, a legendary enchantment for 2 black and 1. Players can't draw cards or gain life, which is kind of interesting, and at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player loses 3 life, searches their library for a card, puts it into their hand, and then shuffle. Really interesting. So you're both tutoring every single turn instead of drawing. It shuts down all of your opponent's draw spells. There's so much little bits of upside, silver lining upside built into this card that I think is really easy to overlook. It shuts down life gain decks, doesn't allow them to get any life gain triggers because they can't gain life. It shuts down any card draw that your opponent's playing, takes away that advantage. If they're building a deck, especially if it's a control deck that's built around having a bunch of card draw engines or a bunch of card draw spells that are generating more value for them so that they can go over the top of you in the game, you're shutting all of that down. And sure, you can't draw either, but getting rid of all of those extra card draw spells that your opponents might be using is pretty important. You can also pair this with cards that don't technically draw, but instead, you know, put a card from your deck into your hand. There are a number of those cards that exist that basically draw you cards, but don't actually technically draw you cards. You can get around this with that, so you can build card draw into your own deck and still be able to use it, or card draw and still be able to use it, which is really, really interesting. It's also just a clock, you know, every single turn your opponent loses 3 life, and eventually they're just gonna die. So it's really interesting, all of the different things that this card does that I think is really easy to overlook. On the surface, it just looks like, okay, everybody's just tutoring a card a turn, and that's it. But there's so much more that this card does, and I think being able to tutor a card a turn is really interesting. If you play this in a counter spell deck, and you're just always able to tutor up a counter spell that can counter whatever they tutor up, that seems really strong. I feel like there's just a lot of interesting ways you can use this card, and I can't wait to mess around with it. I think it's going to be so fun. There's also ways in Standard, I don't remember the exact card, but there's at least one card in Standard that punishes searching a deck. And so playing this with that and punishing them every turn because they have to search their deck for something every turn could be really good. If you remember what that card is, let me know in the comments, because I know there's a card out there that does that, but I'm drawing a blank on it. Either way, this card's going to be really, really fun. But next up, we've got Goliath Daydreamer, a 4/4 giant wizard for 2 red and 2. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand, you exile that card with a dream counter on it instead of putting it into your graveyard as it resolves. Whenever this creature attacks, you may cast a spell from among cards you own in exile with dream counters on them without paying its mana cost. Oh boy. So every single instant and sorcery that you cast from your hand gets exiled. And then when you swing with this thing, you can just recast those cards for free. That seems busted. On a 4/4 for 4 that's kind of on rate, it's not even like a super expensive creature. It's not even a creature that's got crappy stats, so it's really easy for your opponent to just block with something small and trade with it so that you don't get more triggers. It just keeps doing its thing. I don't know if this is quite good enough for Standard, because 4 mana is still kind of on the cusp, which seems crazy to say, but power creep's a hell of a drug. And I don't know, man. This is one I definitely want to experiment with. If you're super deep into instants and sorceries, the one thing you do have to make sure is that when this is out, you can only exile the instants and sorceries that you play in order to replay with this after this thing is already out. So this thing needs to come out, then you need to play a bunch of instants or sorceries, and it needs to survive in order to attack. And that's like kind of the one downside. Asking for a 4-drop to survive a turn cycle when it gives you this much value is a pretty big ask in the current Standard. It's probably almost always going to die to removal. That being said, if you can get it to work, it can give you an insane amount of value, and I have a feeling someone's going to come up with some ridiculously weird combo deck that uses this and actually makes it work. So, I don't know. If you have ideas about how to use this card, definitely let me know in the comments. But next up, we've got Selfless Safe Right. This card is nuts. This is another good example of how crazy the Convoke deck's going to be in Standard after this set. A 4/2 elf warrior with flash and Convoke for 2 green and 3. So if you have enough creatures, it could be a free card at instant speed that's already a 4/2, can trade with something your opponent does not want it to trade with, but more importantly, when it enters, you choose a creature type. Other permanents you control of that type gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So the Safe Right itself will not protect itself, but it can protect everything else as long as you're in a tribal deck. And what's interesting is you don't have to be in an elf tribal deck, even though this is an elf. It's obviously going to be so much better in an elf tribal deck because it's going to pick up all of your other elf synergies as well as doing its thing for all of those elves. But you could run this as a random creature addition to any tribal deck and just give all of those creatures of that tribe hexproof and indestructible when you play it. That combined with the fact that it can trade super well and potentially be super cheap. You can play it after blocking. It's insanely good on the defense, right? You block with all your dudes, and then you tap them all down to play this for free. Protect all of the dudes with Indestructible. You can even do it at instant speed in response to a removal spell. Everything about this card just seems nuts to me. Convoke decks are going to be back. So many tribal decks are going to be all over the place. I can't wait to see if any of them actually end up being good enough. It's a really exciting time. I'm just so happy that we're going back to Magic lore and no more of this Universes Beyond stuff. I know it's going to come back next set, but for now, let me enjoy my Magic the Gathering, you know? Next up, we've got Lava Leaper. This is a 4/4 elemental for 1 red and 3, which is already kind of on rate. All creatures have haste. That does include your opponent's creatures, so be careful with this. And whenever a player taps a basic land for mana, that player adds 1 mana of any type that land produced. So, really, really good in a monocolor deck, it seems. This one's really, really interesting. This one's super interesting because it does 2 very different things. The fact that the haste is symmetrical and works for your opponent is a little risky, but kind of interesting. All of your stuff gaining haste, you can absolutely get value out of that. But then this other ability that seems completely disjointed from the first ability to just get extra mana out of a basic land, it does seem really good against, like if you're running a monocolor deck or even just a 2-color deck with very few non-basic lands, it does seem pretty good against like a lot of the other decks out there in the standard meta right now, other than monocolor decks, are going to be using a lot of non-basic lands, almost all non-basic lands right now. So being able to get a one-sided benefit like that, boost up all of your mana production without boosting up theirs, is going to seem really good against certain decks. I really don't know what to think about this. It is an elemental. It is going to slot into elemental decks potentially, but there's a lot of different ways this can go. I'm sure you guys will come up with some really crazy ideas for this one. I think it's gonna take until we've seen pretty much the whole set spoiled before we have a really good idea of what exactly we can do with this card. But there's definitely something specific that Wizards has in mind. I can feel it in my bones that they want us to build with Lava Leaper. Next up, we've got Winnowing. This is a sorcery for 2 white and 4, but it has Convoke, so it could theoretically be free. For each player, you choose a creature that player controls, then each player sacrifices all other creatures they control that don't share a creature type with the chosen creature they control. This one's really interesting. So the floor is you get to pick their worst creature to stay, you get to pick your best creature to stay, and everything else dies. And maybe you played it for free. Maybe it's a free board wipe. But then it gets even better, because if you're running this in a tribal deck, your whole side stays. Your whole side stays, and only their worst creature stays. Unless they're running a tribal deck, in which case, their whole side stays. Interesting. Interesting. So sometimes this can whiff. Is this a sideboard card? I feel like this is maybe a sideboard card for tribal decks, where if you're not up against another tribal deck, you bring this in, and it's just insane value. You can cast it for super cheap by convoking it out with your own creatures. All of your creatures will survive, and if you're not up against another tribal deck, everything except their worst creature dies. That's an insanely huge swing. Would be super powerful. The problem is if you're up against another tribal deck, this does literally nothing. It's a complete waste of a card, because they're not going to have to sacrifice anything. You're not going to have to sacrifice anything. So, this seems like huge risk, huge reward. Am I missing something here? Let me know in the comments how you feel about this card, because I feel like the chances for this to be busted are pretty high, and the chances for it to whiff are also pretty high. So it's like a huge risk reward. Definitely feels like a sideboard piece, but let me know how you feel in the comments. The power is definitely there. But next up, we've got Dawnhand Dissident. This is a 1/2 elf warlock for just 1 black mana. You can tap it and blight 1 to surveil 1. You can also tap it and blight 2, exile target card from a graveyard. And during your turn, you may cast creature spells from among cards you own exiled with this creature by removing 3 counters from among creatures you control, in addition to paying their other costs. What an interesting card. Cast creature spells from among cards you own exiled with it. So you blight your own stuff, exile your own stuff. If you have nothing to exile, you blight your own stuff to put stuff in the graveyard with the Surveil ability, and then eventually get to blight your own stuff to exile your own stuff, and then eventually remove all those counters to get all those cards back, right? That seems really interesting. That seems really interesting. It can also just incidentally happen to exile stuff that your opponent wants to keep in their graveyard, which is nice. That's always a really, really good thing for like best of one or just pre-sideboard hate against Reanimator decks. If you happen to be building a deck that utilizes this the way it's intended, you just also get the upside of, if you're up against a Reanimator deck, they're going to have a huge headache because this just comes out on one and just sits there. And they have to deal with it, or they can't do their reanimation shenanigans, which is really nice. Just a lot of interesting stuff going on. This is another one of those cards that I don't think we're going to know exactly how to use it until the entire set is spoiled, but there's a lot of potential here. I'm really excited to see what this can do, and if we get even more cards that interact with counters in really weird, interesting, unique ways, a card like this could get really, really crazy really quick. So I'm just excited to see where it goes. But next up, we've got Champion of the 𝐻𝐸𝐿𝑜𝑟, a 4/5 Kithkin Knight with Flash for 1 white and 3, which is already really, really good. As an additional cost to cast it, you have to behold a Kithkin and exile it. So you can either reveal a Kithkin from your hand and exile it, or exile a Kithkin you already control that's in play. Other Kithkin you control get +1/+1, so it's also an anthem for the rest of your Kithkin. And when this creature leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to its owner's hand. Interesting. So if you have a Kithkin with an ETB, like an enters the battlefield ability, you might want to actually behold that Kithkin after you've played it, so that eventually when you do get it back, you get to re-trigger the ETB, which is kind of interesting. I think most of the time the behold is going to be a downside, but it is nice that you get it back eventually, right? No matter what, you get it back eventually when this thing's gone. This just seems like a lot of value. I think Kithkin decks are going to be super crazy, super fun. I don't know, super. I'm just excited, man. This set's wild. Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering, that's actual Magic the Gathering. I love it. But next up, we have Champion of the Weird, a 5/5 Goblin Berserker for 1 black and 3. As additional cost to cast this spell, you behold a Goblin and exile it. Pay 1 life, blight 2. Target opponent blights 2. Activate only as a sorcery. Wow. What an interesting... This card seems... This is definitely a card. And then obviously when the creature leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to its owner's hand so you get the thing back. This is definitely a card that in, you know, standard the way it was years ago, this would have been like huge. Like a 5/5 for 4 that for no mana can just start, just activated ability, use removal on your opponent's stuff is really, really strong. Like if you've got a big enough board, like if you're running, I don't know, Golgari mid-range or something with just huge bodies, like scaling down your stuff to kill their stuff feels really, really good. Also, in a sacrifice style deck, you can still blight 2 just a 1/1, right? So you lose a 1/1 and you kill their 2/2, or you lose a 1/1 and you make them -2/2 smaller, you know? You do have to pay a life every time you do it, but if you're in like a sacrifice deck where you're getting payoffs when your stuff dies anyway, maybe you're draining that life and getting it back and hitting them where it hurts. I like this card a lot. I like the idea of using it in a sacrifice deck as an engine to just remove all your opponent's stuff and get rid of your own stuff to get your triggers. I like that it's a big body and can help you just get through and finish the game. I like that it gives you the Goblin back. I guess that's kind of the one downside to it, is if you're trying to build it into a sacrifice deck, you do have to have a Goblin tribal deck to some degree in order for this to work the way it wants to. So do those two things overlap at all? I'm excited to find out. I think this card is nuts. But next up, we've got Mirror Mind Crown, an artifact equipment for 4 mana. It equips for 2 mana, and as long as this equipment is attached to a creature, the first time you would create 1 or more tokens each turn, you may instead create that many tokens that are copies of the equipped creature. Oh, this is a lot like... What's that mask? Oh, I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But it's a lot like that other equipment, the mask, where it makes a token every turn of the thing you equip it to, except this will make a whole bunch of tokens at once, theoretically, if you have a way to make tokens. There are more hoops to jump through with this card, but there's also way more potential benefits. The ceiling is way higher. If you play this in a token deck, you like uptick Elspeth to make 2 1/1s, and instead you get 2 copies of whatever this is equipped on. Just seems kind of bananas. Anything that's making multiple tokens at once is going to be nuts. Obviously, Elspeth's going to be crazy with a card like this because she doubles, you know, your token generation. There's definitely going to be a crazy token deck that wants to use this. The only real downside of this card, the only bummer, is the fact that it's a whopping 6 mana before you get to turn it on, before you ever get to use the ability. And that is kind of a lot. But if you're in the right deck and you can get enough value out of it, I think it might be worth it. Next up, we've got Sanar, Innovative First Year, a 2/4 Goblin Sorcerer, a legendary Goblin Sorcerer, for 4 mana in the colors of Izzet. It's hybrid mana, so you don't have to be in both blue and red, just one or the other, but it has a Vivid ability. At the beginning of your first main phase, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X non-land cards, where X is the number of colors among permanents you control. For each of those colors, you may exile a card of that color from among the revealed cards, then shuffle. You may cast the exiled cards this turn. So it's important to note you don't get to cast them for free. They're not free spells. It's not that crazy. That being said, it triggers every single turn at the beginning of your first main phase, every single turn. So it's just pure value. You're just exiling non-land cards every single turn, getting to play them. Just seems nuts. I don't know. It's expensive. It's 4. You might hit stuff you can't cast. You have to play a bunch of colors to get Vivid to trigger and get a lot more cards out of it. But at the end of the day, it's just pure value. I think it's really fun. I think it's really interesting. It might be really good as a commander. Although as a commander, you're going to be stuck with a 2-color deck and the Vivid's not going to be as powerful, which is kind of an interesting little caveat to this card. I wonder if there's a deck that's going to be really good with this. Let me know how you feel about Sanar in the comments. This one's a little bit weird. But next up, we've got Abigail, Eloquent First Year, a 1/1 legendary bird bard for 2 mana in the colors of Orzhov. And again, it is hybrid mana, so you only have to be in black or white, not both. It's a 1/1 flying first strike lifelink for 2, which is already crazy. And when Abigail enters, up to 1 other target creature loses all abilities. Put a flying counter, first strike counter, and lifelink counter on that creature. What an interesting card. Like, just the body is pretty good for 2 mana. I think there's going to be like a flying tribal deck. Maybe not a bird deck, but I do think this can slot in with some interesting cards that we've seen in the last few sets. Just having a 1/1 flying first strike lifelink for 2 seems kind of good. And the ability can be versatile. You can use it on your opponent's thing if the abilities that your opponent's thing has are detrimental enough that it's worth putting a flying counter, first strike counter, lifelink counter on it in order to get rid of all of its other abilities. But you can also pivot and use this on your own creature. You can use this on a huge vanilla creature to turn that huge vanilla creature into a huge flying first striking lifelinker, which is kind of insane. I think that's primarily what you're going to want to use this on, use this as. But the fact that it can pivot and get rid of your opponent's creature's abilities if you absolutely need to, especially if it's a smaller creature that isn't going to get as much value out of those counters, makes this card very, very versatile, especially for just the 2-drop. I love everything about it. I'm super into it. It's also an enters the battlefield ability, so if you're building some kind of a flicker or blink deck, it gets even better, and we are absolutely going to build a flicker or blink deck, maybe multiple. I'm super excited to build that archetype, and this card would be really, really good in a deck like that. But next up, we've got Bree of Clan Stout Arm, a 4/4 legendary giant warrior for 4 mana in the colors of Boros. Has an ability, an activated ability, 1 white and 1, tap it, another target creature you control gains flying and lifelink until end of turn, which is pretty decent. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, you exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost if the spell's mana value is less than or equal to the amount of life you gained this turn. Otherwise, put it into your hand. So what this really wants to do is be in a life gain deck and just give you free value every single turn, which seems powerful. The tap ability, the activated ability, is kind of just gravy. It's a way for, if it is in that deck, you're playing it that way, but you happen to be out of ways to gain life that turn, at the very least you have a way to turn on itself. You know, use the activated ability, pay the mana, give something flying and lifelink, get in there, gain some life so you can trigger the other ability. When you think about it that way, it gets a lot better. That being said, still is 4 mana. We have seen a decent amount of life gain payoff so far, though, so I'm really interested to see if this card's actually good enough to see standard play. I feel like probably not, because 4 mana, yada yada yada, power creep, all that good stuff. But a card like this does have a ton of potential. Being able to free cast stuff can be really powerful if you can do it just right. But next up, we've got Bloom Tender. That's right. We've got... this card is crazy. I can't believe this is in the set. A 1/1 elf druid for 1 green and 1. With the Vivid ability, tap it. For each color among permanents you control, add 1 mana of that color. This card is just gnarly. Not only is this card crazy, but it lines up super well with Badger Mole Cub, which is already like probably the most powerful card in the standard format right now. Being able to play this and Badger Mole Cub in the same deck seems very, very scary. Even if you've only got a 2-color deck, being able to get 2 mana out of this, maybe 3 with a Badger Mole Cub, or even more if you're playing like a 3-color deck or higher, seems kind of nuts. You don't necessarily need to be playing a 5-color deck to get the value out of this. That being said, if you are playing a 5-color deck, it can get even crazier. So I think there's a lot going on with this. It also counts as an elf, and we've already talked about how crazy that is and how much better any elf's going to be than any creature that's not a relevant tribe. This card's just nuts. It makes sense that it's a mythic. It's crazy. Let me know how you feel in the comments. But next up, we've got Mirror Form. Each non-land permanent you control becomes a copy of target non-aura permanent. It's an instant for 2 blue and 4. Really interesting card. Because it's an instant, you have to be very careful about when you cast it. It's not just a blanket effect that's going to sit there and constantly update every creature that comes in. It's not like an enchantment or anything. But that being said, the things that change do change forever. It doesn't say until end of turn, so unless you blink them or turn them to your hand or whatever, they're going to stay whatever you turn them into, which is kind of crazy. Every single non-land permanent, any permanent that's not Nora, like, the possibilities for this card are endless. I don't know what you actually do with this card. Maybe you run it in the Badger Mole Cub deck. Maybe you generate a ton of mana early to play this super quick instead of having to wait until turn 6. And then you just like turn everything into a Badger Mole Cub so that you can make even more mana, so that you could just go way over the top with the most insane high casting cost spells ever. That could be a way you use it. If you have any other ideas about how to use this, let me know in the comments. I do feel like there's a ton of potential for a card like this, but it's tricky. It's definitely tricky. Next up, we've got Meek Attack, which is obviously a play on words for Sneak Attack, an enchantment for 1 red and 2, and it has an activated ability for 2 mana. You may put a creature card with total power and toughness 5 or less from your hand onto the battlefield. That creature gains haste. At the beginning of the next end step, sacrifice that creature. So it's Sneak Attack, except sort of the reverse, right? It's the other side of the coin, which seems really interesting. In a sacrifice deck, this could be good, since you have to sacrifice the thing. Maybe you're getting like 3 mana dudes out for just 2 mana, sacrificing them for free, and maybe that's what you want to do anyway. Maybe you're getting a lot of value out of the haste. There's a lot of interesting things you could do. It's not necessarily going to be as good as Sneak Attack, because you have to get cheap things into play, or not necessarily cheap things, but things that aren't super powerful. I guess that's I guess that's the other thing about this card, right? It doesn't look at the casting cost. It looks at the power and toughness. So you could have a really expensive creature that's just like a 2/2, and you could still put it out into play for free with haste. That being said, if you're looking to really maximize the use of haste, at least attacking, you can only put out a 4/1. Like, that's the biggest power you can be swinging in with haste. So I don't necessarily think the haste is meant to be used with attacking. I think it's meant to be used with tap abilities. I feel like this card wants to be used with really expensive creatures that are small, that have powerful tap abilities, and maybe have triggers when they die. Maybe the evoke elementals? Maybe the elemental abilities you can get, although you won't get to trigger any of those abilities if you're not paying certain colors of mana into the cost. So I don't know if that's actually what you want to do with this. I don't know. But there's definitely something you specifically want to use this with, and I just can't think of it right now. Maybe it hasn't been spoiled yet. Let me know if you have ideas in the comments, because this one's really, really interesting, and I'm excited to see where it ends up. But next up, we've got Aurora Awakener. This card's kind of wild. A 7/7 giant druid with trample for 1 green and 6. That's a whopping 7 mana. But it has the Vivid ability. When this creature enters, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X permanent cards, where X is the number of colors among permanents you control. Put any number of those permanent cards onto the battlefield, then put the rest of the revealed cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. Okay, so even if you're in a mono green deck, right? You play this, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a permanent, and then you get it into play for free, right? You just put it onto the battlefield. Even that's kind of okay, but obviously in a 5-color deck it gets really crazy, where you just you jam this, and then what, you dig until you hit 5 permanent cards and put them all into play for free. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Ghalta, putting a whole bunch of stuff into play for free, hopefully big stuff, but it doesn't grab them from your hand. So it's a little bit better in some ways, because it gets you card advantage. It gets you stuff out of your deck. You still have all the other stuff in your hand to play later on. You're not out of gas, you know? I don't know. I don't necessarily think it's better than Ghalta. I think it's different. But it's similar in some ways, and depending on the circumstance, it's going to be better or worse. It's a really interesting card. It obviously gets a lot better if you can get this out super quick, if you can cheat it into play, whether it's a Reanimator deck or something like that. And if you can do that while you have 5 colors worth of permanents in play, it obviously gets even better. I feel like that's where this card wants to be. A deck where you can cheat it out quick, but cheat it out quick after there's already 5 colors worth of permanents. You don't need green. That's the thing to take into account. It gives itself the green that it needs for Vivid. So it only really needs the other 4 colors down, and then this to come into play as quickly as possible, hopefully cheat it into play. I think that's the deck it wants to live in. I feel like maybe there's a deck like that Wizards has in mind that they want to be built around this guy. The question is, will that deck exist now, or is that something they're planning for later? Because Wizards tends to do this thing where they put out a card that's not good with where the meta is now, that's not good with what's available for sets and cards now, but then a couple sets later they put out the right cards that go really well with it, and all of a sudden out of nowhere the card is super good. They like to do that. So I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being a card where it's not as good now, and then eventually it's insane. Although it could be just really good right out of the gate if it has the right cards paired with it from this set. Or maybe there's something that already exists in Standard that makes this nutty right now. If you know what that is, let me know in the comments. It seems pretty crazy. But that's going to bring us to our last card today. That's Chronicle of Victory, the ultimate legendary artifact for tribal decks. This thing costs 6 mana. As it enters, you choose a creature type, so it can be in any tribal deck. In fact, I think the art is Elves Against Slivers, maybe? Or is that the Phyrexian? I think that might be the Phyrexians. Yeah, that's the Phyrexians. That's the Corrupted World tree, I believe. I forget the name of it off the top of my head. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. creatures you control of the chosen type get +2/+2, first strike, and trample, and whenever you cast a spell of the chosen type, you draw a card. So this will work for any of those tribal spells that aren't creatures, but they have that kindred tribal type. This will draw you cards when you play those spells. It'll also draw you cards every time you play a creature of the relevant type. That's a lot of card draw. Every single deck, or every single card in your deck theoretically could be a cantrip after you drop this, while also giving a double buff first strike and trample to all of your creatures. That's just insane. This card can end the game right then and there if you play it just right in the right deck. I'm super excited to see what ends up being the best tribes in Standard coming out of this set, and what tribes can get the most value out of a card like Chronicle of Victory. Probably a tribe that can generate mana to get this out that much quicker because it is a 6-drop, so I'm kind of thinking elves, which probably makes sense because it shows elves in the art. But I'm also curious if there are some interesting other tribes you could pair this with that would be a really, really good fit. So if you have ideas about it, definitely let me know in the comments. I think this one is pretty wild and shows just how deeply committed they are to making tribal happen in Standard after this set drops. And I'm pretty excited about it. But that's going to do it for this video. I do have another spoiler video on the way detailing all of the Day 2 cards spoiled. So look forward to that one. There's a lot more to dive into. I've got more content on the way across the board. So much is coming. So if you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you are subscribed, please like the video. A huge favor. Please, please, please. It does help the video get out to more people, helps the channel grow. All that stuff helps me out so much more than you could possibly even understand. So thank you to those that have done it every single time, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.